I used to work for a small regional newspaper in Siberia back in the late 90s. My job wasn't glamorous, it was mostly dull reports on local politics, fuel shortages, and the occasional cultural piece. But every so often, something strange would land on my desk. Strange enough that even my editor didn't want to touch it. He'd push the file toward me with that look in his eye, the look that meant, "You'll regret opening this, but it's yours now." That was how I first heard about the case in Tinda. On the surface, it was nothing, a missing person, another entry in the endless list of people swallowed by the taiga. But the deeper I dug, the more unsettling the story became. Even now, decades later, I can't shake it. Sometimes I wonder if what I uncovered was really meant to be forgotten. Maybe the people of Tinda had been trying to bury the truth, not because they didn't care, but because they were terrified. And after what I saw with my own eyes, I don't blame them. It started with a name, Sergei Antonovich, a logger in his early 40s. Married, 2 kids, by all accounts a stable family man. He vanished one January night in 1997, walking home from a shift at the mill. The police logged it as another case of a drunk wandering into the snow, but his wife swore he hadn't been drinking. His friends said the same. I took the train to Tinda, a bleak little town with nothing but endless rail yards and the taiga pressing in from every side. When I asked around about Sergei, people shut down immediately. At the bar, men turned their backs. Women crossed themselves. The name alone seemed to make them uncomfortable, as though saying it might invite something into the room. Finally, one old man agreed to talk. He was a retired switch operator who remembered the night Sergei disappeared. He wasn't drunk, the man told me flatly, staring into his vodka glass. He was walking home along the track, same as always. But he wasn't alone. Someone was following him. I asked what he meant, but the old man just shook his head. He muttered something about the ones who walk behind and wouldn't say more. That phrase stuck with me, the ones who walk behind. The next day, I visited Sergei's widow. Her name was Galina, a gaunt woman whose eyes looked like they hadn't closed in months. She welcomed me in, made tea, and then sat stiffly across the table, gripping her cup as though it were the only thing anchoring her. "You want to know about Sergei?" she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. She leaned closer. "Then you must promise not to write everything. Some things are not meant for print. Do you understand?" I promised. She told me that for weeks before his disappearance, Sergei had been complaining about noises on his walks home. Not wolves or bears, he knew those sounds well, but footsteps. Human footsteps, always just behind him no matter how fast he walked. When he turned, no one was there. At first, he laughed it off. Siberia is full of paranoia. Long nights, endless silence, it plays tricks on you. But then it got worse. Galina said Sergei had started seeing shapes at the edge of the tree line, tall figures motionless watching him. He said they blended with the trees, as though the forest itself were alive and shifting. He described their eyes, small, pale, and glowing faintly in the dark. I remember her voice trembling when she told me this and the way her knuckles whitened around the teacup. "The last night," she whispered, "he told me they were closer than ever. He said one of them spoke his name. That was the night he vanished." The official story was simple. Sergei left work, started home, and never arrived. The search teams found nothing. No body, no tracks beyond his own, as if he had stepped off the earth. But Galina wasn't satisfied, and neither was I. I walked, the same route Sergei had taken, from the mill along the frozen tracks and through the narrow strip of forest leading toward the town. The cold bit deep into my lungs and the silence was absolute. No birds, no distant engines, nothing but the crunch of my boots in the snow. And then I heard it. Footsteps. I stopped. The sound stopped. I took another step. A moment later, another crunch followed, just behind me. Not an echo, something else. I spun around, but the path was empty. The trees loomed, their trunks like prison bars, but there was no one there. I told myself it was paranoia. The villagers had planted seeds in my head, and my imagination was doing the rest. Still, I walked faster. My breath came in sharp bursts, fogging in the icy air. The footsteps quickened behind me. That was when I ran. I burst into the streetlights of the town, gasping, my heart hammering. When I finally looked back, the path behind me was empty, but I could swear, just for a moment, that I saw movement between the trees. Something tall and thin watching. That night in my hotel, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the crunch of snow, felt the prickle of being followed. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to a sound that froze me solid. A whisper. My name. It came from the corner of the room. I snapped on the light. The room was empty, but the window was open, snow drifting onto the sill. I hadn't opened it. I left Tinda the next morning. When I got back to my paper, I tried to write the article, but every time I sat down, my skin crawled. My editor took one look at me and said, "Forget it." He pulled the file off my desk and locked it away. But I couldn't forget. Even now, years later, I still hear footsteps when I walk alone at night. Always just behind me, always stopping when I turn. I've moved 3 times since then, but it doesn't matter. They follow. Sometimes I wake to the sound of my name whispered in the dark. And I know wherever Sergei went, whatever took him, it hasn't let go of me either. I've always believed that places can remember, not just people, not just history, but the land itself. Some places hold scars as if the earth never forgot what was done upon it. I used to laugh at that idea, but after what happened in Naryan-Mar, I don't laugh anymore. I was a university student in Arkhangelsk when I first heard the rumors. They spread in whispers. Legends of an abandoned psychiatric hospital deep in the north near the Pechora River, a place Soviet maps had erased. They said experiments had been conducted there, things worse than what was done in Moscow or Leningrad. Patients who were never patients, doctors who weren't doctors, screams that echoed through the forest. Most of my friends dismissed it as urban legend, a ghost story to pass the time during dark winters. But I was young, arrogant, and hungry for adventure. I wanted to prove myself braver than the rest. So when a fellow student named Ivan said he knew the way to the ruins of the asylum, I agreed to go. There were 4 of us, me, Ivan, his cousin Nikolai, and a girl named Lena, who carried her father's old camera. We set out in late February when the snow was deep and the nights were endless. I told myself it was just a building, just concrete and steel, but even before we reached it, I could feel something pressing against my chest, as though the forest itself were warning us to turn back. It took 2 days by snowmobile to reach the site. The forest was thick and silent, muffling even the sound of our engines. And then, like something rising out of the white earth, the asylum appeared. It was massive, 5 stories tall, its windows shattered, the roof sagging beneath decades of snow. Rusted bars still clung to some of the frames. The sign above the entrance had been torn away, leaving only jagged bolts like teeth. I remember the way Lena lowered her camera when she first saw it. "It looks hungry," she whispered. We laughed, but not for long. Inside, the air was colder than the forest outside. Our breaths came in clouds as we moved down long corridors lined with peeling paint and broken doors. The walls were covered in strange markings, scratches, symbols, letters carved into the plaster by desperate hands. Some of them weren't in Russian. Some weren't in any language I recognized. The deeper we went, the more the building seemed to groan as if it resented our presence. We set up camp in one of the larger rooms, what must have once been a ward. The floor was littered with rusted bed frames, some still bolted to the ground. The walls were covered in faded murals, childish paintings of trees, rivers, the sun. But they were wrong. The trees bent in impossible ways. The rivers ran red. The sun had no face. That night, none of us slept well. I woke to the sound of whispering. At first I thought it was Ivan and Nikolai talking, but when I sat up I saw them both asleep across the room. The whispers seemed to come from the walls themselves, soft and urgent, like 100 voices pressed close. I pressed my ear to the plaster. For a moment I swear I could make out words. Shanikon. The next morning Lena was pale. She said she'd had a dream of patients wandering the halls, their faces covered in gauze, their mouths sewn shut. But their eyes, she said their eyes were wide open, watching her. begging her for something she couldn't understand. Ivan brushed it off his nerves, but I saw the way his hand shook as he lit a cigarette. We decided to explore the basement. The stairs were broken, but we managed to climb down. The air grew damp, foul with the stink of mold and rust. The basement was a labyrinth of corridors and locked doors. Some had been forced open long ago. Others were welded shut. In one room, we found rusted equipment, tables with leather straps, cabinets filled with shattered glass jars. Inside the jars were things. Preserved organs floating in murky fluid, eyes, hands, a lump of something that might have once been a brain. Lena lifted her camera to take a photo, but before she could press the button, the bulb in her flash exploded. The sound was deafening in the silence, and for a second, I thought something in the shadows had moved. That was when we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the hall. We froze, staring at one another. Ivan whispered, "Maybe it's other explorers." But the way he said it, I knew he didn't believe it. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Whoever or whatever it was, they were dragging something heavy across the floor. A chain perhaps, or metal scraping stone. We bolted. We didn't speak. We didn't look back. We just ran through the corridors, our lanterns swinging wildly. I swear I felt the air grow colder behind me as if something were reaching out. We burst back into the upper levels, gasping. But when I dared to glance back down the stairwell, the darkness seemed thicker, almost alive. We wanted to leave, but the storm outside had grown worse. The forest was impassable, and our snowmobiles were buried. We were trapped. That night, Nikolai disappeared. We woke to find his sleeping bag empty, his boots gone. His pack still lay beside the bed frame, untouched. We searched the building for hours, calling his name. Our voices echoed, but no answer came. In the basement, we found fresh tracks in the dust, boot prints leading deeper into the darkness. But after a few meters, they stopped. Not turned, not doubled back, just stopped, as if Nikolai had vanished mid-step. Lena began to cry. Ivan cursed under his breath. I just felt numb. That evening, as we huddled in the ward, the whispers returned. Louder this time, pressing against my skull, threading into my thoughts. I couldn't tell what they were saying, but I felt the meaning. Hunger. Lena clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. They want us, she whispered. I told her she was imagining it. But deep down, I knew she was right. The storm finally broke on the fourth day. We didn't wait. We packed what little we had and left the asylum behind, dragging the snowmobiles free from the drifts. None of us spoke during the journey back. When we reached Arkhangelsk, we went our separate ways. A month later, Lena drowned in the river. No one knew why she'd gone out onto the ice alone. 2 months after that, Ivan hanged himself in his dorm. His note was short, scrawled in shaky letters. They won't stop whispering. I was the only one left, and I can tell you this. They haven't stopped. Even now, in the dead of night when the world is silent, I hear them, whispering at the edge of hearing from the corners of the room, from the walls themselves. They remember me. The asylum may be rotting, the snow may cover its bones, but its hunger is endless, and one day I know it will call me back. When I was younger, I worked in the mining town of Vorkuta. If you've never been there, imagine a place built on ice and sorrow. Rows of crumbling apartment blocks, the endless howl of the wind, and the black mouth of coal shafts yawning in the permafrost. People didn't live there. They endured. I had gone to Vorkuta in 1989, desperate for work. The Soviet Union was falling apart and jobs were scarce. Mining wasn't what I wanted, but it paid, and I was young enough to think I could handle it. The mine had a reputation, though. Accidents, cave-ins, men swallowed by darkness. The older miners spoke of it like a living thing, as if the earth itself had moods and grudges. They said the tunnels carried voices, sometimes warnings, sometimes curses. I thought it was superstition, until the night everything changed. It started with a collapse. We were 2 kilometers underground, a team of 8 working the late shift. I remember the crack of stone, the roar of falling earth, the way the ground bucked beneath my boots. The light snapped out, plunging us into blackness so thick it felt like drowning. We scrambled for our lamps, coughing in the dust. 2 men were crushed instantly, buried under tons of rock. The rest of us were trapped. The radio was dead, the tunnels blocked. We had air, maybe a day or 2, but no way out. That was when the voices began. At first I thought it was just panic. Men calling out in the dark, echo bouncing from the stone. But the more I listened, the less sense it made. These weren't the voices of my team. They were softer, distant, like men speaking from another tunnel just beyond the wall. Sometimes it sounded like singing, low, mournful, in a language I didn't recognize. One of the older miners, Yaroslav, went pale. "They're here," he whispered. "The ones who never left." We tried not to listen, but the voices grew clearer as the hours dragged on. They seemed to come from every direction, the walls, the floor, even the ceiling above. At times they called our names. By the second night, 2 more men were gone, not dead, not crushed, just gone. We woke from uneasy sleep to find their helmets lying where they'd been, lamps still glowing. Their packs were untouched. No footprints led away. The tunnels were silent except for the voices. Yaroslav said the mine was cursed. That during the war, prisoners from the Gulag had been forced to dig the shafts by hand. Hundreds had died down there, buried where they fell. He said their souls had never left, bound to the darkness, hungry for the living. The others laughed bitterly, but I could see the fear in their eyes. That night, as we huddled in the dark, I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, approaching from the blocked shaft. I raised my lamp. There in the dust I saw shapes. Men. Dozens of them. Their outlines faint. Their helmets glowing with a pale blue light. They stood silently, staring at us. I blinked and they were gone. Only empty tunnel and rock. But the air was colder, and the voices louder than ever. We lasted another day. Food was gone, water nearly gone. The air felt thin, my lungs straining. Men began to whisper to themselves, rocking back and forth in the dark. Then Alexei, the youngest of us, stood up. His face was blank, his eyes glassy. "They're calling me," he said. Before we could stop him, he walked into the tunnel. Straight into the rockfall. We shouted, grabbed for him, but he vanished. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. Like he'd stepped through a doorway we couldn't see. Yaroslav broke down, sobbing. The rest of us just stared. Rescue came on the 4th day. They blasted through the rock and pulled us out. Only 3 of us left alive. The officials asked what happened, but none of us could explain. How do you tell men in suits that the dead walked in the dark? The report said 6 died in the collapse, bodies unrecovered. Another lie to bury the truth. I left Vorkuta after that. I swore I'd never go underground again, but the voices never left me. At night, when the world is quiet, I hear them still. Faint whispers drifting through the walls. Sometimes I wake to the sound of footsteps outside my door. Last winter, I went back to Vorkuta. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I wanted to prove it had all been in my head. The town was worse than I remembered. Half abandoned, buildings boarded, streets buried in snow. The mine entrances were sealed with concrete, warning signs rusting in the wind. But standing there, staring at the frozen earth, I felt it. That same pressure in my chest, that same cold dread. And I swear, beneath the howl of the wind, I heard it again. Voices calling my name. Sometimes I dream I'm still down there. Trapped in the tunnels, lamp flickering, the air thick with dust. I hear the footsteps behind me, closer and closer. When I wake, the dream clings to me. The air in my room tastes of coal dust, my ears ringing with whispers. I know one day I won't wake at all. The mine will take me back.